welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Russ Roenick, co-founder and managing partner at Transom Capital, a middle market private equity firm focused on carve-outs and special situations. We're going to dive into that today, but also diving into how these guys are using AI into their portfolio company and what they're using as a value creation strategy. Let's dive in. Russ, share with us a brief insight into you, please.
Well, I started this business almost 20 years ago. So I started a private equity business, yet I had never done private equity before jumping in head first. So a little bit of a unique background, I guess. I was at McKinsey and Company before I started Transom back in 2008. And I was working on private equity oriented projects on behalf of, much larger private equity firms at the time, working on their due diligence and working on portfolio challenges that they had and the like. But I partnered together with my partner Ken way back when. He had some direct private equity experience, but for me it was like all in, heads first, learning by doing right from the get-go. And so here we are almost 20 years later. So I guess it worked, right, to some extent. But for us, we've always been very value centric, very value oriented. Maybe that comes from at the beginning, not really knowing necessarily what we were doing and wanting to be as keep things as close to the best as we possibly could. But that franchise and that strategy has actually done us very, very well over the years. And so, we are a middle market, value oriented buyout investor. I tend to sort of talk about the landscape for value buyout, sort of sub-segmenting into three general strategies. You have, a strategy that's very sort of oriented around distress, meaning companies that are facing some existential threat, insolvent or facing insolvency. That's not what we do. And then there's the preponderance of value firms that really focus on buying heavy industrial businesses, running a lean transformation, usually businesses that have some sort of large factory footprint. If you're buying these businesses for a value, meaning a low multiple EBITDA, because, candidly, like they're not in the most attractive underlying industries. And so you can buy them cheap, you can harvest cash flows, you can sell assets along the way. It's a tried and true strategy, works really well. It's just a little bit of a different flavor for value investing than what we practice here. For us, we are very focused on buying businesses on the front end at a value, meaning sort of like a mid-single digits, multiple of EBITDA. But we're buying those businesses and underlying industries that trade somewhere generally in the range of, 8 to 12 times EBITDA.
Mhm.
That's kind of our focus. And, the magic comes in trying to sort of take that 8 to 12 times multiple landing point, which really is tied to the industries that we focus on. I mean, we focus on high multiple industries like tech hardware and special distribution and the like. We've got to find a way to cram that multiple down into our sort of mid single digits starting point. And so the way that we go after that is through leveraging two forms of complexity, meaning
Mhm.
operational complexity and situational complexity. So operational complexity means, we're not buying, A plus assets, at least at entry, right? We're buying sort of B minus quality businesses, oftentimes businesses that need some form of operational sophistication or operational edge that we could bring to the table. We have 6 specific sort of operational transformations that we zero in on and that we really focus on when we do that. And then we think about situational complexity. We can't compete in a broad auction style process with 250 other private equity firms because the best price will always win. So what that means is we're really focused on, 3 or 4 ways in which we enter transactions that all have some degree of complexity in and around the entry point, meaning carve-outs, which I know we're going to talk more about here. Oftentimes we work with lenders and sort of help them with their sort of over-levered,
Mhm.
some of my troubled assets. A robust area for us as well lately have been working with tail end funds, meaning private equity firms that ultimately are, they've chosen not to raise the next fund or struggling with raising their next fund, and they need to drive some sort of DPI, that need, liquidity back to their portfolio or their LPs. And so that's how we've done it. for me, as I was saying, I started this business. I had not done private equity directly before I did it. And so, I had that sort of classic top down, operational and strategic approach toward the way that we went after things. We started the business, all this being said, in 2008. And so, we started in early 2008. World's great. Things are easy, right? Money's growing on trees. And by September of 2008, world's on fire. We're in the GFC. Everything feels like it's melting around us.
Mhm.
And what that really forced was like a totally different model for engaging. And as I said earlier, like we needed to learn by doing. And so we sort of flipped the engagement model on its head and went very bottom up. Meaning we got inside of the portfolio companies every single day, working the problem. For me, some of the most valuable experience that I had is I ran a couple of those businesses as the CEO in the early days. And so I got direct line level operating experience, and all that essentially rolled up into some success in the early days when success was hard to find, especially in that early era. And we felt like if the business model that could get us through those troubled waters, was good enough to sort of succeed, it should work even better once the ground underneath our feet was a lot more stable, which is obviously what it has been for call it the last, 15 or so years. And so in a nutshell, that's us. That's why we have a very, very tactical style of engagement inside of our businesses, working alongside of our leadership teams that are running those companies on a day-to-day basis to effectively, run the business efficiently, put one foot in front of the other, while at the same time in parallel running, what can be, a pretty dramatic operational transformation to radically improve performance, double EBITDA, if not more, and ultimately expand multiple.
Thank you for that. What's one mistake that you see private equity firms making all their portfolio companies, and what would you suggest to correct it?
I think one of the things that has, been the most successful for us over the years is changing with the times. Not changing the model by which we invest, meaning it's a very rigid model for which we, work through the problems or the opportunities inside of this. And it's very bottom up. And, you know, our entry multiple window and our exit multiple window are rigid. The transformations we take a business through are rigid. We kind of know what we're good at and we try to stick to that. But we try to change and be creative in terms of where we can find value because the access points for opportunities change, right? The market changes, where you can sort of hunt and peck for value can change. Meaning, we're not rigid around we just got to be doing all corporate carve-outs or we just have to be buying everything that we can from talent funds. We try to be as creative as we can on the front end of our opportunities, both in where we find them and how we ultimately structure them in order to, have a constant source of deal flow, and the right sort of type of opportunities that, fit the business model that we've created.
So nothing is simple in anything or business, should I say, but certainly private equity lens. You guys have kind of put a specialism around carve outs, special situations, which obviously, from my perspective, require more attention from an executive search lens and no doubt from a private equity perspective. Why the decision to go into something outside of the a traditional, let's put normal business, albeit I don't know if that's a phrase that can be used.
Yeah, well, look, I think it kind of all comes back to the beginning of the story for my partner, for myself, for the people that we surrounded ourselves with. Like, I think that we all have that sort of deep operational perspective that we brought to the business from the early days, right? And we've really winnowed that down over time because look, you can't be all things to, all opportunities. We're not perfect. We don't do we're not experts at every form of operational transformation that, exists under the sun. Like we're six things that we do. We try to do them exceedingly well. We feel pretty confident in terms of identifying those opportunities as well as identifying solutions for them that we can really execute with a high degree of confidence or and certainty. And so I think that, it's kind of where we came from that influences where we are. to a large extent. And that I think that's why we decided to sort of like go down this road. At the beginning, it's not as if we knew like, oh, we're going to do a lot of corporate carve outs. So we're going to buy a lot of businesses from lenders. We just knew that we liked value. We wanted to dig in, wanted to be hands on. We wanted to have that sort of operational lens, and that drove everything. And then ultimately, to my earlier point around just being creative and flexible around, we first find those opportunities. So it happened, those characteristics, lend to doing carve outs, and they lend to doing the other sort of forms of transaction that we talked about earlier.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick mention of a long-standing partnership with Grata. As you will probably know, the private equity scene is constantly evolving, and deal flow is moving now to proprietary and data-driven processes. Grata provides you with the data and information of over 7 million private companies. So if you're looking to improve your proprietary deal flow and improve the data access, then reach out to Grata today. Now back to the podcast. What is it that you believe that companies get wrong in the carve outs and special situations perspective that you guys have focused on differently?
So I think that the vast majority of private equity firms hear carve out and immediately they translate that into, excess risk. And I think that that is accurate if you don't have the experience and have built up a team that actually knows how to, go about both performing the carve out as well as digging in operationally. Right. And so I think that it all boils down to the people you surround yourself with at the firm and the expertise that they carry and that they bring to the table. Um, that I think is probably like why the vast majority of firms just say carve out, like, too heavy of a lift, not what we do. And I think they're probably right. Like you've really got to have the personnel to sort of back up the strategy. And it takes a long time to build up that base of personnel that you could trust, right? And that sort of, follow that sort of like fairly, you have to be fairly rigid, and you have to be really good at certain things like running a PMO, like a project management office, because there's a lot of moving pieces going on all at the same time. And so if you don't have that like DNA, or you don't have the people who really know how to do it and have done it time and time again, I think it is scary and it is more risk. For us, we see it as opportunity, right? Not risk. But I think that that's probably why you don't see a lot of firms gravitating in the same direction that we have.
Makes sense. And you spoke about the value creation work that you've done. It references our method, which I liked on your website. Walk us through how you're helping your portfolio companies by driving your value creation, operational improvement, and capabilities.
Yeah. So, we really focus on six things, six specific types of operational transformations. And that's the North Star, is following those. We have a large operations team. They're the largest team we have here at the firm. They are working with the portfolio companies and the leadership teams every single day to sort of prosecute, some set of the six operational transformations that are on our menu. So the six in, really quickly, Salesforce transformation, meaning we buy a lot of businesses with a large field selling staff. Oftentimes there's varying degrees of performance from, the best salesperson down to the worst salesperson. We have, tactics and strategies to help you sort of like, at the very minimum, take those low performers and bring them up to overall, industry or company average. And, your gross sales is a function of that. New product innovation is another big one. Um, you know, my background, even before I was at McKinsey, was I was a product developer at Microsoft. And so this one is sort of something that I really, championed and brought to the table in the early days, and has become a big level for us. You know, Companies generally pretty good at understanding their customers, pretty good at understanding how to translate those customer needs into features and benefits and products and product line extensions and services and the like. But universally bad at getting those things to market quickly enough to like capture the opportunity or the full extent of the opportunity. So we can help them collapse the vertical path to get there faster. Digital transformation is the third. So we think about digital transformation historically, it was like looking at a, dysfunctional ERP system or e-commerce platform, ripping it out, dropping something in there that's state of the art, that's, cheaper, more effective, gets the company moving in the right direction. And we still do a lot of that. But now we spend probably 75, if not 80% of our time when we're thinking about digital transformation, implementing AI. Just implementing, starting with the back office, getting AI implemented through all the functions there. And now we're pushing it into the front office and sort of, looking at, analyzing the sales queue or forecasting and the like to try to like drive top line performance. Fourth area that I think that we're the probably of all the things we do, I think this is what we're the best at is supply chain. So, we have about 650 basis points of printed gross margin expansion across our realized assets. We have, in some cases, we have like companies where we even improve gross margin by over 2,000 basis points. We love supply chain. We love disaggregating supply chain and into all the sub strategies that you can go attack. And they're usually fairly mutually exclusive. So you can hit one and then move to the next and the next. And so, we're talking about things like running an RFP process or a value engineering process or, a lean transformation and the like, right? You can sort of do each of these things in sequence to really ladder up the gross margin. The fifth area is straight up cost reduction, right? So you're finding all the discretionary spend inside the SG&A, squeezing it out, trying to do that relatively quickly within 90 to 120 days. And then the last area you focus on is talent and culture, meaning, we know oftentimes we buy businesses that, they're B minus quality. Maybe there's one or two executives that are really sort of, in the way of transformation and high performance and just, they're not adapting to the times or call it what you will. We'll work with the company to identify leaders that are more appropriate for that business. We have a proprietary process we build that uses not just the typical sort of qualitative interview process, but a lot of quantitative data to increase our hit rate and bring in the right executives for the job. And so, those are the six things that that's our method, to your point, that would really sort of focus on. There's many other things we theoretically could focus on to create value, but we kind of steer away from them because they're not within the core skill set of the team I built.
Makes sense. So you mentioned your value creation setup within the firm. A bit of a high discussion point around how people and firms are structuring that at the moment. We've seen the larger businesses predominantly going, guys like yourself, ex McKinsey tech-esque, guys coming in as operating partners or whatever the job title they're putting on. Lower middle market, typically working on the ex-operator, proven, done it, that type executive to come into that. And then there's kind of contention around specialist versus the kind of generalist, whether it's a specialist CFO, specialist AI person. What is it you're doing at Transom that's driving the value creation, and how are you structuring that?
Yeah. So, what we try to do, as I mentioned, we built this large operations team. The way that we built it is we're trying to really bring the best CEOs and CFOs from our exited portfolio companies over to Transom. We're trying to convert them to the dark side, right? We've worked with them through a full investment life cycle, had a great win with them. They know us, we know them intimately, right? We probably worked together for 3 to 5 years in pursuit of that, transforming that business. And so we've got a lot of operating history together and we can effectively, bring them on board here at Transom to oversee their own portfolio of assets. And it's fairly seamless. And so that's been our methodology for building out this function and team. And then, they're all members here at the management company and they sit side by side with our M&A team and our business development team and the people that work on our platform, meaning, we're not using sort of a third party model with arm's length, operating executives like most firms do. Like these are folks that are actively working on new investments. They've got an equal voice and an equal say in, consummating a new investment opportunity alongside everybody else here at the firm. And I think that's a pretty big point of differentiation for our business model and how we execute it. And again, I think like, we have our operations team in there from day zero, and they're effectively the ones that are identifying all the transformations that are available and they're sizing the impact of them and how long it's going to take to execute. And so I think when we underwrite something, there's a high degree of reliability between what we expect to happen during underwriting and what actually comes to pass post closing.
Okay, and you referenced obviously digital transformation being part of it. Couldn't go through a podcast without talking about AI, of course. Walk us through what you're doing with AI. How are you adopting that into your portfolio companies? And if there's any kind of look, we've seen opportunities here, which we've rolled this out. I don't expect you to give away all your top secrets, but be interesting to see how you're kind of using that private equity through to portfolio.
Yeah. So it's probably 2 years ago that we went like all in with AI implementation. So, one thing I've heard recently is like, even if you don't know anything about AI today, you're only 6 months behind, those that know it really well. So I think, my first message is if you're not going there now, or you're not already there, you're not that far behind because it's changing so fast. Right. So, but nevertheless, we started to really go deep about 2 years ago. And, as I mentioned before, we started by really focusing on sort of like the back office functions inside the company, accounts receivable, accounts payable, customer service, right? And in trialing various solutions, making sure that they were piloting them. And then once we identified the right, specific spot solutions inside the businesses, we would roll it out throughout the portfolio. And then we sort of pick that same methodology um, regarding sort of, driving sales and product related initiatives that impact revenue. And so that's kind of the methodology. In terms of the implementation, we have a chief technology officer here at Transom that oversees the AI implementations inside every company. And we have, usually there's a chief information officer or a chief technology officer inside each portco, but there's also like an AI champion, which can sometimes be a different person than that CIO or CTO. And that person is responsible for making sure the execution and, the team being behind this and the sort of user acceptance and everything is like spot on inside that business. So we try to be the architect and the driver of the AI, and we sort of help select, what the right, tools are inside the business for the needs of the business, but then we're putting a lot of the ownership on the company to roll it out because if the company doesn't own it and we're just like slamming in from the top down,
Mhm.
uh, you're just not going to get people on board to the same extent as if it's effectively something that the company owns and is driving organically.
With regards to the actual implementation of AI, if we look at part of the problem for a lot of companies is working out where, when, how, what, why. But that initial point where, what are you, so if you're looking across the portfolio company, what's the kind of commonality of a single project as like, hey, we are using AI for specifically data into our CRM or something equivalent of that?
Yeah. So commonalities across the portfolio, there's some really good tools out there that are fairly well established, for managing your accounts payable and accounts receivable. And, I think
Mhm.
that those are well understood right now. Um, but when it comes to, forecasting and it comes to like taking the data and the salesforce.com installation, yanking it out and running it through an AI engine. I think we're still in that more like figuring out what the right tools are. And sometimes the right tool for company A is not the right tool for company B.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably where, at least we find ourselves in the journey is like there's some stuff that's much more standardized and there's others that are, you know, more company specific based on its needs and how it, what kind of business it is, how it goes to market and otherwise.
Nice. And what do you read? What do you watch? What do you listen to? You recommend others should check out, please?
So, I'm not a big consumer of books, but I'm a big consumer of no, as a kid, I had like, 7 magazine subscriptions, right? And so to all the things that I thought was cool and was doing and, video games and this and that, whatever. And so the equivalent of that is like, I'm on the internet reading all the time, right? I'm on the internet reading all the time. I'm sitting in as many meetings as I can here at the firm and inside the portfolio companies from time to time as more of a fly on the wall, right? To just keep my hands on what's going on out there, more macro as well as more micro inside of our own business.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, what I can't do is like sit in a bunch of those meetings and just sort of, strong arm my opinion. Because people just go act on it, because like, this Russ is saying it. And that's not the right way of leading and managing an organization or, a set of portfolio companies. And so you kind of need to know when to lean in and when to sort of step back and like, you know, maybe that's an art that I'm still trying to perfect here. But I'm much more of to answer your question directly, much more of like a current news person, and I'm trying to synthesize that into the takeaways that I need to be a better leader and help our business continue to grow than I am sort of, reading the latest sort of business book, off the shelf.
Okay. And if anybody wishes to reach out to you post this podcast, how best they get in touch, please?
Shoot me an email. It's my last name, Roenick, Roenick at transomcap.com.
Marvelous. Well, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast, sharing us all into the world of carve-outs and special situations, and for McKinsey to private equity investing. So thank you.
Of course. Appreciate it, Alex.
And of course, thank you very much for everybody for tuning in yet again to the Private Equity Podcast. Till the next time, keep smashing it.